It's March 19th, 2021. I'm here with Kathy Thompson from Inverness. Welcome as a Legacy member.
Thank you.
Kathy, I understand you were born in Utica, New York, but came to Florida at an early age. How did you decide to become a band director?
Great story there. And before I get into that, I wanted to thank the FBA and thank the Legacy Committee for inviting me to do this. I'm very honored to do this.
Well, you certainly belong.
My parents were both musicians. I was so blessed growing up. We had music in our house all the time. My mother was a high school vocal director her entire working life. And she was a great musician. And through her, from singing in her choruses to listening to many, many concerts that she put on, I really developed this love of good choral music. And my mother, and this relates to something that I tell my kids a lot, is develop your skills enough in high school that when the opportunity comes for you to play beyond high school, you feel comfortable doing it. That you can't play soccer when you're 50, but you can play your trumpet. But my mother continued to play musically and to use her musical skills up until a few months before her death at age 96. She played piano in church. It was awesome. My dad was a professional saxophonist, and I have many memories of listening to him practice the saxophone. He was very disciplined in his practice habits. And my concept of saxophone sound came from hearing him for years. And he had this warm, dark sound. And I remember him talking about Fred Hemke. And Fred Hemke at that time must have been a very young man. But it was that sound, and that really shaped my concept of saxophone sound. So we had music in our house, and good music. And I remember when I was probably in upper elementary school, maybe middle school, we had this recording of the Leonard Bernstein Overture to Candide, and I was just bound and determined I was going to conduct to it. Of course, very crudely, I'm sure. But I had watched my mother enough that I had some idea. I knew one was down. So I remember playing this recording and trying to conduct to it. I didn't have any music. I could never figure out that time change at the beginning. And then I was good. Once it got into the cut time, I was pretty good. And then of course it goes on to other things later on. But I have that memory. And little did I have any idea that I would be waving my arms around for my entire adult life. Because the last thing that I think I was thinking of at that age was what I was going to do as an adult. I'm pretty sure I was wandering around bumping into walls when I was still in middle school. So at some point when it became time to be able to play an instrument, surprisingly enough, I didn't choose the sax. In all of the music that we had in our house, I had somehow fallen in love with the clarinet, the sound of the clarinet. So that was the instrument that I chose, and that was my primary instrument through college. When I graduated from high school, I went to USF, and I have to say I got a really good education at USF. It was early. This was 1968 to 72. USF had not been open that long. And you know, when we studied minor instruments, we were taking lessons with the main person. So I got a good fundamental education there. And then after college, I got my first job at Wildwood High School. It was a great place to start. It was a program in disarray, and it was a great place to make a lot of mistakes. And I will never forget the interview for this job, because I'm pretty sure, this was 1972 now, and you can relate to this. There were very few women band directors, especially at high school level. And it was quite obvious that the principal was not really all that excited about hiring a woman, but apparently he didn't have too many applicants. So he said to me, if you can just get the band to play the Star Spangled Banner recognizably, you'll be okay. You'll be okay. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, what am I walking into here? But thank goodness we were able to play the Star Spangled Banner, so it was recognizable. And we were able to do much more. So
Oh, yes, you did.
but it was, again, it was a great learning experience. And everybody's first job is when you find out what you didn't learn in college. And no matter what school you go to and how good of an education, there's just some things that you have to get on the job. So from there, I was there for 7 years. From there, I went to Citrus High School. And again, this seems to be a theme, but I will never forget the first interview with the principal there. God bless him. I went in late afternoon, and everybody had kind of left, and he closed the door, put his feet up on the desk, pulled out the chewing tobacco, and says, "Why do you want this job?" So again. Apparently there was something about the interview that he liked. So I was hired, and it was a bigger school, bigger program, completely different community, and again, lots of culture changes, and it was building a program and changing attitudes, and teaching lots of fundamentals, but new things to learn. Again, I'm very grateful for that experience. Those 6 years there were wonderful. I went from there to Hernando High. I was at Hernando High for 11 years. And there was a totally different set of challenges, because that was an established program, had already been successful. Like, who are you? So there I had some really hard learned lessons, which is you can't just go in and change tradition that had been there a long time. And I learned that some traditions are worth keeping, and you need to go in and establish yourself a little bit at a time. But it was really at Hernando where I learned how to develop good sound, because I had good feeder there. Bruce Brzezinski at Parrott Middle School, great feeder. I didn't have to get freshmen in and teach them where third position was after bone. And this, I had to do a fairly good amount of that at Citrus, was just trying to, reteach, teach lots of fundamentals, and there was a lot of that I didn't have to do. So I had to learn, and in some cases I'm gonna address that a little bit later, but had to learn a lot of things the hard way about developing good sound. From there I went to middle school for 13 and a half years. And if you had told me when I first started teaching that I was going to be in middle school, I would have said, no way. But I needed to make a change. I needed a little simpler life at that point, which I thought mistakenly this was going to be easier. Believe me, it is not. But what I learned was kids at that age are very endearing. And having at that point taught for almost 25 years in high school, I had a really good idea of the things that kids should know coming out of middle school, going into high school. And so that was really a help, having had those years in high school. So all of that really prepared me for what I'm doing now, which is at Seven Rivers Christian School. It's a part-time, I'll just say it's post-retirement, post-third retirement. But I teach 6th through 12th grade. So I have the whole gamut. I have 6th grade beginning band all the way through high school. And it's really cool because the kids who stick with it, I have them for 7 years. And last year, in the worst of the COVID pandemic, where the kids didn't really get to do their spring concert, was my first graduating class of kids that I started in the 6th grade.
Oh my.
And they were with me for 7 years, so it's really cool. I'm not sure it's as cool for them because they have to put up with me for 7 years, but it's cool for me. And you know, from having been a high school band director, from the freshman to the senior, all the kids who stick with it, you spent so much time with them, and you develop a really special relationship with those seniors. And so now I have kids for 7 years, and it's very special.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And you're all on one campus there.
Yes. It's a small school. You know, the challenges there are quite different. The challenges are a numbers issue. It's a great place, but our K through 12 enrollment is a little over 500. So,
well, that does present a whole different set of challenges.
Yes.
Talk about the different challenges. High school presents, middle school presents. How do you recruit? How do you keep a balance of instruments and keep from having a flute farm with 2 drummers? How do you go about those things now and in the past?
Well, now I just make sure that I start with a balanced group in 6th grade. And it doesn't mean that when they get to the 7th grade and they can opt to be in band, that I'm going to end up as a balanced group, because usually that doesn't happen. But I mean, all through my teaching career, and it's always been in rural areas, there has never been a time that I didn't have to stand up in front of the band and say, "Hey guys, hey team, we need French horns. Who would like to switch?" Or I would go to an individual and I would say, "Hey, I think you're doing really well. I think you would be a great person to play French horn." And this is what I love about band kids. I never had a problem getting kids to switch, and I won't say that every kid said yes, but given the pep talk about team and how important it was to the team, the kids bought into that. And eventually, I did a lot of starting kids from scratch and switching kids over, and having kids come to me in the 9th grade and say, "I always wanted to be in band, but never did, and so let's stay after school and let's learn an instrument." Most of us have to do those kinds of things.
So a young director coming in and discovering that the day doesn't end when the bell rings, it's not new. It's been going on for years.
Yeah, that's something that we all need to learn. Okay, so we're talking about challenges, and I found, surprisingly enough, that between middle school and high school, I was really teaching the same things. The approach that was different was just dealing with a younger student, and in middle school there is so much more repetition because they are hearing everything for the first time. And it's not intuitive. You have to say it over and over and over, and you have to do it over and over. So honestly, and you kind of have to motivate them a little bit different way. They're more into external motivations, external rewards than high school kids are. But as far as what I was teaching, it was really the same thing. And fundamentals. And in talking about challenges, money and equipment were all, no matter what level you're on, and this is a challenge for everybody. My first full day at Wildwood High School, and thank goodness it was over the summer, because I walked into the band room and there was music from one end of the room to the other. And so the first big challenge there was to try to organize a music library, figure out, there was piles everywhere of just trying to sort music and figure out what didn't have enough parts to be viable and throw it away. And I mean, it took me the most of the summer, and then trying to cobble together workable percussion instruments, because I knew we had football marching band staring us in the face. And so that was a big challenge. Same thing to an extent as Citrus, not as great an extent, but still in every situation I was very dependent on band boosters. And I've been very blessed to have some really good band booster organizations that were very supportive. And one of the things that I did, not initially, but I learned to do this later, is at the first band booster meeting of the year, I would have a state of the band message. And it was a philosophical message. This is what I'm here for. You know, we're all in this together. We're here so your child can get a great music education. And this is what my job is, and I need for you to help me. And I found that this worked very well with parents, to get them on board. When I would say these are the instruments that we need to purchase, or this is the equipment that we need to purchase for marching band, or whatever it might be, I found it much easier to get them on board with we're all in this together for your children.
Mm-hmm. Very wise, very wise.
So, and I would say too, and this is a challenge for all of us, because it's not just a teaching challenge, but it's a cultural challenge. I've often felt throughout my career that it was almost a clandestine goal of I want to convince students, parents, administration, community that the band is a medium of musical expression. Because especially in high school with marching band, that's the most visible part of the program. And how many times have you had someone say to you, well, now that football season is over, what do you do the rest of the year? You know, as if we had nothing else to do. And so, I would try to take every opportunity to convince students and parents, we're here to make music. That's what our principal purpose is. That's what my job is. I want you to love music the same way I do. Mm-hmm. So I think that was maybe the biggest challenge, and it's an ongoing challenge because it's a cultural challenge from the world that we live in right now.
For sure. Can you talk about the challenge of COVID, since you've been teaching through that?
Well, I have been very fortunate because at Seven Rivers, we took the philosophical approach that we wanted to be in school, and our parents wanted us to be in school. So we have had a couple of instances this year where they had to quarantine an entire grade, and that grade, was doing online school through Google. Mm-hmm. We had 9 days out of school earlier in the year. But other than that, we have had in-person school, and I've not had to deal with some of the challenges that public school teachers are dealing with being, having half of your kids in school and half of your kids out of school. And I'm very grateful for that, because that is challenging beyond belief. And I'm so glad that basically we are in in-person school. Now we do have protocols, some pretty strict protocols in place, and in the band room I have a parent who made bell covers, and we use puppy pads, and I've moved away. I'm not as close to the students as I used to be. The flutes have flute guards, and so we take some precautions, but once they're in the classroom, they take masks off. Mm-hmm. They have to wear masks in the hallway in between classes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Life has certainly been different.
Yes, it has.
It has. Well, we'll return to challenges in another way later. But I'd like you to talk about some pivotal moments and pivotal people that have affected and affected your career?
Well, it's interesting, and I think that this was one of the points that I really wanted to make to any young teacher watching this, because some of the pivotal moments were things that were failures on my part, and people who took the time and stepped out of their comfort zone and had the courage to come to me and say, there's something that you're not doing, or there's something lacking here. And it's hard to take at first.
Wow.
No one wants to hear those criticisms, but I am so grateful. People like Dwayne Hendon, who had no, he was not at all shy, but I'm so grateful. I mean, he pointed out some things to me, and at first I'm like, you don't want to hear it. You don't want to hear criticism. But in the end, it's the best thing that can happen. I grew from that. I grew from having, listening to judges' comments, and I'll never forget one. This was a state festival judge, and it was at the right time of my career that I needed to hear this. And he said, look, you need to take the next step. You need to start listening. You need to do a better job of teaching kids how to blend, how to balance. And I realized that he was right, and I made a concerted effort to start listening to Marine Band and outstanding college ensembles, everything that I could get my hands on, which is much easier these days than it used to be. You and I didn't have YouTube when we first started out. But it made all the difference in the world. I started listening to what is band sonority? What is this supposed, how do I get this? How do I make this happen? And again, it was a criticism, but it was something that I learned from, and I became a much better teacher as a result. And there's a story that I tell kids. I'll bet you I've probably told this story 50 times throughout my career.
Make it 51.
Okay. When I was in college, I had a teacher my first 2 years, and it was just fine. And then he left on a sabbatical, and a new teacher came in, and I went in for my first lesson, and he said, well, play for me. And I whipped out my clarinet thinking I was real hot stuff. And I'm playing whatever, some etude. And he looked at me and he said, so-and-so, the name of the prior teacher, he said, you were a good player. And, wow. Mm-hmm. Well, that was kind of humbling. And he looked at me and he said, you're not putting any air through your horn. You're not supporting. And it took months. He gave me a Spohr concerto, the second movement of which was interminably slow. And my job was to be able to play these phrases on one breath and to really fill up my instrument with air. And it took months for him to finally say compliment me. Mm-hmm. I am so incredibly grateful, because as a result of that, and as a result of the improvement that I saw in my own playing, it has made all the difference in the world in my teaching. So the lesson here is, as hard as it might be to hear criticism, learn from it and get better from it. Because honestly, if we're totally honest with ourselves, if we're constantly being affirmed and we're constantly being told how great we are generally not introspective, and we're not thinking about as much about ways to get better. So those were times where it was a failure on my part that I used to be a much better teacher. Also, people that I brought into my band room were oh my goodness. When I was at Hernando, I was so fortunate to get Bobby Adams to come over, and what a master at being able to turn around a band in a few minutes in terms of sound. And I would sit there with a notebook and take voluminous notes and learn from him. And Joe Crinus, of course, used to come over, and people in my area. I learned something from all of them. So
we had Bobby and Dwayne and Joe. What about, those people are not available now? What do the young directors do now, in your opinion, or what should they do?
There are just tons of people right around you who want to help you. There's us old folks, us old retired folks that are willing to go out and help. There are people, this is the great thing, and I'm sort of jumping ahead a little bit, but that's okay. This is a great thing about the Florida Bandmasters Association. Everyone wants to help each other be better. And you don't have very far to go to get help. And I'm going to address that a little bit more in one of these later questions, but I wanted to make mention of one other pivotal moment. It's kind of strange, but in my early years, I used to wonder, I wonder if I had chosen a different career. Would I be able to make more money, or would I be happier? The fundraiser, the fundraiser thing that would all come in the room, driving
Coke candles.
Right. And they would always be nicer dressed and drive nicer cars, and somebody was always contacting me, wanting me to sell insurance. And one day, this is maybe 10 or 12 years into my teaching career, I was reading an article by Jim Croft, and the article was about how he loved this thing called band. And I read this article, and I'm like, it was like a light bulb. And I'm like, yes, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. This is what God has called me to do. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And I never, ever, one time, ever thought about doing anything else after that. And that's why I call it a pivotal moment. And it was just, again, there are moments in life where you meet the person that you're supposed to meet, or you read something that you're supposed to read, and I think from then on I enjoyed what I was doing. I relaxed a little bit more, and I was grateful, because we both know people who go to a job and it's just a job. And they earn a living, and they may earn a lot more than we earn. But I've realized over the years how incredibly grateful I am that I can do what I'm passionate about. I can do what I love. Not everybody can say that. So
that is so important. While we're on the subject of words of wisdom and advice, you have so much to give. Please.
Well, I'm going to say a couple of things, the first of which we alluded to earlier, but get help, get help, get help, get help. You just can't do this on your own. You just can't. Even in the age of technology where, we can belong to all these Facebook band director groups, and they're helpful. I read them all the time, but there is no substitute for having someone in your room, and you're watching them. You're listening to what they're saying about the very music that you've been rehearsing for 4 or 5 weeks, and they're hearing things that you didn't hear, and you're sitting over there feeling bad because you're saying, well, how could I have missed that? But again, it's all part of this learning process and learning to become more discerning. And the more different people that you have up in front of your band, the better. Because they're dealing with your kids, and they're dealing with music that you've been working on. So you can relate to it. You can learn more from it. And I again, as we said earlier, I'm so grateful for all of the people, and not just collegiate people. These are people right in my own area that came to my band room that, offered words of wisdom to me, to the kids. I learned from all of them. There are resources there. Don't be afraid to ask, and whatever you do, Don't say, well, I got to get my band to this level before. No, my goodness, don't do that. You know, there isn't, the people that you're going to ask to come in, we've been in every kind of situation in our own experience. And so, you know, there's not going to be anything new. And if your kids have just started on their music and they don't know it yet, well, then you can learn something from watching someone teach them their parts. I mean, every step of the way, there's something to be learned. And so the other thing is listen to as many good bands as possible. It is so incredibly important that you keep your ears, shall I say, clean. You know, you've got to listen to good bands, good collegiate bands. Dallas wins, Tokyo wins. You know, there's Marine Band that I mentioned earlier. I mean, there's great bands to listen to, and no shortage of recordings available right on YouTube. So keep listening to good bands. Keep going as often as you possibly can. FMEA, summer convention. Go to your local district meetings, because being in touch with people of like interest, colleagues who love band like you do, you know, you never know when a completely benign conversation you're going to pick up something that you needed to hear at that particular point. So take advantage of all those things. Don't be one of those people that never goes to district meetings. You know, get involved, because someday you're going to be the one that needs to help the younger director. And I feel like that's part of our responsibility as shall I say, veterans, rather than saying old.
Vintage.
Yeah, there you go. The other thing is, and I'm going to put it this way: fundamentals, baby, fundamentals. Everything that you do in rehearsal, do it from a fundamental tone quality basis. And we all know that we should work on long tones at the beginning of rehearsal. Yes, that's a good thing. But don't let kids play them mindlessly. You know, teach them what to listen for. Why are you playing this Remington warm-up? You know, what's the purpose of it? What should they listen for? You know, talk about the pyramid of sound. You know, make sure that they are listening for specific things when you do long-tone warm-ups. To me, everything comes from, starts with good tone and works from there. Everything that you're going to do musically, and I tell kids, your sound is your sole medium of musical expression. So the quality of your sound is the single most important thing. And when you're working on articulations, when you're working on dynamics, okay, you can't really do any of those things well until you start developing a more mature sound. So everything that you do, and be grateful for all of the times that you get corrected. Be grateful for those times you've been humbled, even though it may be hard at the time.
Why were you so, why was it so important for you to bring your bands to MPA to hear other bands? Why not just show up, play on stage, do your sight reading and leave?
Well, good question. Well, for one thing, there was always bands better than us. So there were always bands that I wanted my kids to hear. There was always bands that I wanted to hear. And the MPA experience in itself is important. I mean, there's a carrot. It's a carrot that you dangle. It's, you know, it's the one time of the year that you prepare those three pieces to the highest level of performance that it is possible, and that's what the purpose is. You want to get an evaluation on your very best efforts. But certainly part of that experience is to hear other bands. And for the kids, you know, it's interesting too, because I would often give my kids judges sheets and have them fill out judges sheets when they were listening to other bands. And you know what I discovered is the things that I emphasized in rehearsal were the things that they would write down on their papers that they were listening for, which was a good thing.
And also made you aware of what you might have been skipping
Yes.
the emphasis on.
Yes,
I
absolutely.
learned that one the hard way.
Absolutely, and it also it tells you that the things that you consider important are the things that kids will consider important.
And that goes, you walk the walk in your life. And you teach by example so much more than just music. You haven't touched on that part of it yet. Would you please?
Well, and that's interesting because, in thinking about personal characteristics, I wasn't even thinking along those lines, but yes, I do believe that we have a responsibility for our personal behavior, and we have a responsibility outside of the classroom as well. And I know that may not be a commonly held opinion, but yes, we should be held to a standard of behavior in the classroom. And it's interesting because I had a student one time who was nominated for this turnaround student of the year, and I think they're still doing that. And I was not at the ceremony, but the next day, the assistant principal came and said, the student at the ceremony named you as the person that was most responsible for their turnaround. And I thought to myself, well, why? I didn't do anything. Well, this student was someone who had been in band, didn't work out, they dropped out, they came back the next year, they were friends with some other kids in the band, and he came back the next year, and he said, Miss Thompson, I want to get back in the band, but I want to play string bass. And I said, okay. I said, I'll see if I can find a string bass for you. We did not have one, and I had no clue I was going to find one. But I said, I will find a string bass for you, but you have to have a good attitude. You've got to show up to rehearsal. You've got to do all the things that I've asked other kids to do. And that's all I said. It turned out this kid completely turned around. He turned out to be a band captain. He turned out to be a great student. I think my point in this story is that we never know when that moment, that particular moment, I said the right thing that kid needed to hear at that particular time. Mm-hmm. I didn't know. I mean, I was just telling that kid the same thing I would have told any kid. You gotta show up here with a good attitude, and the same things that we expect of any kid. But it was what he needed to hear at that particular moment. So you never know. You never know when that one thing that you say to a kid is going to make a huge difference. But that brings me to the next point about personal characteristics, and I think one characteristic that we all need to have as band director is just perseverance, because this is a job of extreme highs and extreme lows. It's not like going to the office every day and sitting behind a computer. In the art world, in the performing art world, that's the way the job is. I mean, we have a great rehearsal and it makes our day, or a great performance and it's euphoric. But then we also have these lows in which you think you are the worst band director in the world and that you have no idea how to do this. And I can promise you, anyone who's been doing this for any length of time has experienced both of those, and they're extreme. And so you have to just persevere through it. You have to know that neither of those two will last, and neither, as you said a while ago, neither is true. You're not the greatest thing, and you're not the worst. But you have to persevere, and I think you have to persevere through bad times. If you're in your first job, you need to persevere. If you think this is a terrible job and you need to move on, make it better first. Make wherever you are, make it better than it was when you got there before you make the decision to move on to a different job, because you're going to learn so much in the process that will prepare you for that next job. And I would say the other thing, personal characteristics, we need a lot of patience. I mean, I don't care where you are, what school you're at, you've got challenging kids. You've got kids that will try your patience. And you have to remember that they deserve your time and attention, no matter how frustrating they may be sometimes. Again, it might be that one kid. It might be that one kid that really needed band that might make a difference in their lives. So you need a lot of patience. And
well, we've talked about many things, and we're just about out of time. I'd like to have you tell me a short story that demonstrates your life as a band director. Why are you so satisfied with it?
Well, I'm going to preface that by saying that a wise colleague of mine told me one time that we should take great satisfaction in small victories that might happen daily or weekly. Mm-hmm. In other words, that little kid that has that light bulb moment, that kid that you've been trying to get to put air in their instrument, and all of a sudden they get a good sound and they get a note, that they haven't been able to get. It might be a small thing in the big scheme of the world, but to that kid it's a big deal, and you want to make a big deal out of it. And so I've tried to remember that, to take satisfaction in these little small things that happen more often. But to directly answer your question, I remember a morning that it was the morning of marching MPA. I was at Hernando, and I always have my kids come early because Parrott Middle School, our primary feeder, participated in marching MPA, and they were always the first ones on. So I took my kids, so we would be in the stands to kind of support them when they had their performance. So it was early in the morning, kids are kind of filtering in, and I see this group of students kind of gathered over in the corner, and I'm like, that's never a good sign. So I walked over there, and they're listening to the Holst First Suite.
Wow.
And I'm like, yes. On the morning of Marching Festival, and they said, Miss Thompson, can we play this piece? Absolutely, we can. So that was a kind of a neat moment that I will treasure, and all of us have moments like that to be grateful for and to treasure.
Well, I have treasured your friendship for many years.
Absolutely.
And I
Same
have treasured
here.
this time together. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this interview.
Thank you for asking me.
Oh, you certainly deserve it. Time to say bye-bye.
Bye.